What's up, guys? We are back like the Renegade Master after a very nice week off without the UFC. We now have a fantastic card to dive into this weekend and a very busy UFC schedule running into the end of the year. We've made a profit every single year for the last 15 years, and we want to end 2024 strong and bank some good profits between now and those final cards in December. And I'm very confident we're going to be able to do it through hard work, consistency, and also persistence. So, as ever, we're going to be taking a deep dive into each of the main card fights on this weekend's card from a betting perspective. And all the information that I'll be sharing with you in these breakdowns is backed up by over 10 years of experience and hours and hours and hours of research that I've put into researching these fights. So I'm really hoping you're going to find the information in these breakdowns useful. If you do, please hit the like button below and subscribe if you haven't already. Before we get into the breakdowns, you can skip ahead. You can go to those breakdowns and watch them right now. But before I do that, I am going to play you a little bit of a clip of a live bet that we won on the last card. I think you'll find it interesting. Take a look, take a listen. It basically shows you the kind of things that we do in my live betting group over the long term. Over the last 8 years, we've made a profit on approximately 70% of UFC events in my live betting group. And as you can see recently, we've been on a little bit of a dip. But as you can also see, we've also been changing the trend to start to grind up profits slowly this year. And if you look back through history, every time we have a dip, you can see here, you can see here, you can see here, you can see here, you can see here. Every time we've ever had a dip in UFC live betting, we follow it up with a massive winning run to the extent where you couldn't even get in my live betting group for years because it was full and I had to go to a waiting list system, because obviously the more people that try to place the same live bets at the same time, the faster the odds become suspended. So I set a cap on my membership group. But as ever, whenever you have a dip, whenever you take some losses, whenever you have a bad run, people leave and spaces become available. And so spaces are currently available. But I think we're about to go on another massive winning run. Like I say, you can already see profits trending up here. You can see how we've performed in the past. And so this is probably a really good time to get in, really good opportunity to jump on the live betting train with me, because this is my speciality. This is what I do best. This is what I've done well on for so long. And we crush it most of the time, pretty much all the time. So check it out, and I'll roll a clip now of a live bet we hit on the last card so you can kind of see what it's all about. I do apologize for the poor audio quality. The reason why we have to have poor audio quality in the live betting group is because of latency or delay on the stream. Basically, we want to keep data transfer speeds at an absolute minimum so that I can broadcast my live bets to you wherever you are in the world with less than 1 second of delay. When you start to introduce things like high quality audio or video, it increases the data transfer sizes, which increases the delay, the latency that it takes for you to hear my basically, my recommendations, my bets. So the audio quality is bad because we need to keep data transfer sizes as small as possible. But the upside is you get to hear my live bets, my commentary, my advice, my perspective on fights as they're happening in pretty much real time. So the poor quality audio is definitely a worthwhile trade-off. So check it out. Here it is. Really good fight, this next one. Classic striker versus grappler matchup. As you would have seen in the promotional video, Ryan Loder is a grappling coach, wrestling coach. So he's a pretty strong wrestler, pretty skilled grappler, heavy grappling control. The issue with Loder is that he doesn't really have much striking to set the takedowns up. His striking is very, very limited. And also, on top of that, he doesn't shoot many takedowns. When he does shoot takedowns, he fully commits to them. But outside of that, he's very stiff, very slow, bit of a sitting duck on the feet. Valentine is a very dangerous striker, true legit knockout power. He's very, very aggressive. He will have a big advantage over Loder when it comes to striking, but Valentine's takedown defense isn't the best. He is quite weak off his back. He is quite a low level on the ground. So this is one of those fights where Valentine will have a big advantage on the feet. Loder will have a big advantage on the ground. It's been a while since we really saw Valentine's takedown defense and ground game tested. So we don't really know the chances that he's got of keeping this fight standing. All the footage on Valentine's takedown defense and ground game is from about 2 years ago now. And fighters often improve a lot when they're on the Ultimate Fighter. So, you know, very early on in this fight, I would imagine we're going to get a strong read on how this one is likely to go. Um, in Valentine's past fights, he was pretty weak off his back, pretty easy to hold down. Like I say, Loder's grappling control is really good. This is one of those matchups where we will hopefully be able to snipe a live bet. Valentine also a little bit chinny. He's been rock wobbled or dropped in a lot of his fights over the last few years. But I don't think that's going to be much of an issue here because Valentine doesn't really have the power in his hands to hurt him. So what we need to do is we need to see these guys mix it up on the ground, and we will get a pretty good read on Valentine's chances of keeping the fight standing. But Loder, very, very decent grappler. The problem for guys like Loder is while they are decent grapplers with good grappling control, they are a bit predictable. Like Loder's not a difficult fighter to game plan for. You know exactly what he's going to try and do, which does make him, I'm going to say easy to deal with, but he doesn't have the element of surprise on his side when going for takedowns, which is difficult. So Valentine's showing Loder the Muay Thai stance early. And out training in Thailand. There we go. Double leg entry from Loder. Good read from Valentine. Gets the double underhooks in play. Loder hits the takedown though. Very, very nice. Valentine go into the triangle. Wow, he's going to the triangle. Loder passes out of it. No problem. Valentine looks to get to his knees. Does get to his knees. Very, very nice. Good job here from Valentine. Loder still has control of the body. So Valentine's done a good job to get to his knees there because being taken down out in the middle of the octagon, not an easy position to find yourself in, but he does lose the scramble. Loder gets back into a bulldog choke position, looking for a straight armbar, and Valentine has almost rolled out of it. Very nice job here from Valentine. Looking to take Loder's back now. Two hooks in from Valentine. Wow, Loder's gone belly down as well. Valentine winning the scramble against the grappler. But wow, Loder looking to scramble out of there now. Lots happening here, guys. Valentine gets control of the back again. Deep hook in on the left side. Deep hook in on the right side. And again, Loder goes belly down, which is a bad look, bad body language, especially if Valentine can posture up and land some ground and pound. Ooh, that might be under the chin. That might be under the chin. I can't see from here. It might be under the chin. I can't see from here. It might be there. We can't see from this camera angle. Loder's just looking to punch Valentine in the head. He's not even trying to defend the choke. I can't see if it's under the chin or not. We don't have the camera angle for it. And Loder now has defended the rear naked choke. Valentine in a body triangle. Tight, deep body triangle. The grappler getting out grappled here. Wow, Valentine going for the rear naked choke again. Goes to the opposite side. Loder trying to turn into Valentine. So top position now. Crazy scrambles in this first round. Nice elbow from Loder. Loder's come back online as a decent favourite in live betting. I would have taken him here as an underdog, but as a big favourite doesn't interest me. I thought that Loder might have been an underdog with how difficult the first half of this round was for him with him having his back taken, but people favouring Loder here quite a lot, with him being quite a steep favourite in live betting. Good first round from Loder, but obviously Valentine's still very dangerous. Immediate impact outweighs cumulative effect, so Loder should take that first round. Valentine did well with the back takes. With that, guys, I am going to recommend a 2-unit bet on Loder at odds of 1.61. That's 2 units Loder 1.61. 2 units Loder 1.61. 2 units Loder 1.61. The reason being, and I'm not going to say it yet till everyone's got in, 2 units Loder 1.61. So I think Valentine's right arm is injured. So if you look at him in between rounds, as soon as he goes back to his corner, he basically tells his coach that his right arm is screwed, and his coach immediately ices the right arm. So I think in those grappling positions, Valentine did something to his right arm. So Loder's gas tank is pretty good. Um, he's probably won the first round. He's only got to win one of the next 2 rounds in order to take a decision. And I think Valentine's right arm might be done here. Valentine gets taken down here and Loder into side control. So hopefully Loder can keep the fight here. Under the crucifix position now. Valentine looked quite weak off his back in his past fights, looked quite weak off his back in round 1. Crucifix position now from Loder. Crucifix position from Loder. Valentine trying to scramble on the bottom and free his right arm. Loder looking heavy from top position though. I'd love it if the ref were to stop the fight here. We've seen fights stopped in this position many times. It doesn't take a lot because the fighter on the bottom can't defend themselves. So the referee will usually step in and stop the fight because the fighter on the bottom can't defend themselves, which means the fight should be. It's over, boys. Come on. Come on, boys. There we go. I told you, boys. The game has changed. The game has changed, boys. The game has changed. A month ago, when we had latency issues, we wouldn't have hit that bet. A month ago, when we had latency issues, we wouldn't have hit that bet. We wouldn't have been able to. The odds would have got destroyed by the time we saw the elbow injury. Now we're seeing the fight at the same time as the bookies. We're going to fucking murder them. And we have already seen a change in the last month. We're going to fucking murder them. A month ago, by the time I saw that Valentine had an issue with his right arm, the odds would have got destroyed. This time, I'm seeing the same shit as the bookies. I see he's got an issue with his arm.
boom, we lock it in straight away. All these bets that we've missed since last October, like with Manel Cap injuring his foot, and we had to jump on it late and it wasn't an official bet. Boys, the game has changed. We are so fucking back. We are so fucking back. When was the last time?
So there you go. Did you spot that injury to Valentine at the end of round one? And did you live bet Loder off the back of it? Let me know in the comments below. What was really cool about that live bet is that the odds dangled and were playable on Loder for 30 to 40 seconds, which meant everyone would have had a pretty good amount of time to get in on that live bet if you would have spotted the injury to Valentine. And of course, Loder got the job done for us shortly after in round two, which was fantastic. So if you are interested in my live betting group, that is the type of thing you can expect. And like I say, we make a profit on approximately 70% of UFC events. It's dipped to like 69.3%, something like that, over the last 8 years. It's an absolute money train. I think you'll really enjoy it. Check it out. So now let's break down the main event on this weekend's card, which is going to be Gilbert Burns versus Sean Brady. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Brady is currently the favourite at odds of around 1.53, which is going to be minus 189 for an implied probability of 65%. If we take a look at the odds on Burns, he's around an average of, call it 2.55, which is going to be plus 155 for an implied probability of 39%. So Gilbert Burns is 38 years old, 5'10" with a 71-inch reach. Brady is 31 years old, 5'10" with a 72.5-inch reach. So both guys roughly the same size, but we can see there's a very big 7-year age gap in this fight, which statistically gives the younger fighter around about a 65% chance of winning. But when it comes to stats, it's very important to remember the stats are only useful when interpreted correctly. And so when you consider that statistic, it's an average of all age differences in fights, right? So it's going to include stats from when 35-year-olds fight 28-year-olds, you know, when 30-year-olds fight 23-year-olds, etc., etc. And the results or the outcomes of all those fights are going to have an impact on, you know, that bottom line statistic of 65%. But in my opinion, and this is not a study of data that I've done, but if you took situations where a 38-year-old fought a 31-year-old, I personally believe that the younger fighter would have won a decent percentage of the time, higher than 65%. Because when you've got 38-year-olds fighting 31-year-olds, you've got a situation where you've got a guy in the tail end of his career. He's going to be declining from fight to fight, facing a young, hungry, up-and-coming bull who is very much in his prime and is going to be healthier, more athletic, probably more powerful, probably more durable. And therefore, I think the age gap between Brady and Burns reflects the sweet spot of those age statistics where they're very, 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 very powerful. So what's interesting about this is if you were to just blind bet that statistic over the long term, you know, you'd pop Brady's odds into an implied probability calculator and you'd probably say, well, there's no value here. We know the younger guy wins around 65% of the time when there's a 7-year age gap in a fight. That's exactly where these odds are. Therefore, I'm going to pass on this one. But I think if you actually dug deep into the data, I think this, you know, stat could go as high as like 70 to 75%, like I say, in situations where you've got, you know, Brady going up against someone like Burns in the tail end of their career. And even if you just look at fights we've had in recent history, you know, Jared Cannonier versus Kyle Baralho, or, you know, Bobby Green versus Paddy Pimblett. These were good stylistic matchups for the older fighters, and they both got absolutely destroyed, proving once again that older fighters find ways to lose. Even examples last weekend in fights like Tabitha Ritchie versus Angela Hill, even though that was a more competitive fight than Baralho Cannonier or Bobby Green Paddy Pimblett, Angela Hill still found a way to lose. So these age statistics are really powerful, worth paying attention to. For that reason, even though I don't necessarily think this is a terrible matchup for Gilbert Burns this weekend, I wouldn't bet him, simply because it is so rare that guys in their late 30s, in the tail end of their careers, beat young, hungry bulls. And it doesn't matter how these fighters match up with their opponents stylistically. Angela Hill matched up quite well with Tabitha Ricci. Bobby Green matched up quite well with Paddy Pimblett, and Cannonier even matched up quite well with Baralho. In the first half of the Baralho-Cannonier fight, Cannonier was doing all right. He was holding his own. He was outstriking Baralho. He was neutralizing the threat of Baralho's grappling. And yet we've got those examples where there were big age gaps in each of those fights, and the older fighter lost every time. So the way I look at fights like this is it doesn't matter what advantages Burns may have over Brady. It doesn't matter what Burns' paths to victory are. It's going to be so hard trying to make it profit long term, betting on these older guys against the young hungry bulls, when we know time and time again these older fighters find ways to lose. And on that basis alone, it's very tempting to bet Sean Brady this weekend, because if you were to just blind bet Tabitha Ricci, Kyle Baralho, Paddy Pimblett over these last few weeks, and probably countless other examples that I can't even think of off the top of my head right now, you'd probably be doing pretty good. And this is a trend that we see playing out over and over and over again. So for me personally, a bet on Gilbert Burns, irrespective of how they match up stylistically, is completely off the table this weekend. But let me know what you think in my Discord. Let me know what you think in the comments below. But as ever, we're not just going to take a blanket approach to this fight. We want to look into it in a lot of depth, understand how these fighters match up from a stylistic point of view, because it is likely to be a competitive fight with both guys being very well rounded, and therefore the knowledge that we can consume and learn from the research process will give us, some good information to work with in live betting to hopefully snipe a winner on this fight in live betting. So let's go through how these two match up stylistically. So when it comes to striking, even at 38 years old, this is definitely an area where Burns has the advantage. So what you notice about both Sean Brady and Gilbert Burns, if you watch their recent fights, is that they very much fight from within a defensive shell. Neither guy is particularly aggressive anymore. Neither guy wants to lead the dance. They're both very reactive to their opponents, and I think this is probably partly because they both have a base in grappling, and also partly because to some extent they've been facing superior strikers in recent fights. And in the case of Burns, he's also on a bit of decline. He doesn't have that confidence in his durability and ability to fight at a high pace for as long as he used to in his younger days. So both these guys like to be in a defensive shell. Neither guy likes to lead the dance and go first, and that's interesting because when you look at the recent fights of both these guys, it makes it kind of difficult to predict which guy is going to be the aggressor and lead the dance in this fight. Are they both going to stand in the middle of the octagon and chip away at each other, or is one of these guys going to take the initiative and take the fight to their opponent? The reason why I give Gilbert Burns an advantage on the feet is simply because even at this stage in his career, they say power is the last thing to go, and for me, Burns at this stage in his career still lands the harder, more damaging, more impactful shots than Sean Brady. When you look at Sean Brady striking, he's not really very dangerous on the feet, kind of just touches his opponents and outpoints them, whereas when Burns throws and Burns lands, he still has the ability to hurt you, do some damage, and he still hits pretty hard. And what I've also noticed about Sean Brady in his recent fights is that he doesn't wear damage well. There are some fighters that for whatever reason just cut very easily or don't wear damage very well. Joanne Wood famously said that she doesn't even consider one of her fights starting until she's got a bloody nose, and you really see that with Sean Brady. He wears a lot of damage in fights. He gets busted up pretty quickly, pretty easily, without eating too many shots, and I always think that's a big detriment to a fighter, because in a competitive matchup where you've got really close rounds, that visible damage can often go against the fighter on the judges' scorecard. So I definitely give Burns the advantage when it comes to striking. Now, when it comes to grappling, even though Burns is an ultra high-level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, the reason why we've seen Burns, for the most part in his UFC career, or certainly the second half of his UFC career, evolve more into being a striker, is because Burns never really had the gas tank to grapple hard for 3 rounds, let alone 5 rounds, which is what this fight this weekend is going to be. And for that reason, Burns had to be very selective with when he went to his grappling so that he didn't burn himself out. And that's really where Sean Brady differs. Brady is capable of grappling reasonably hard for longer than Gilbert Burns can, and Brady is also a guy that very much favours position over submission. So whereas Burns is going for submission attempts, quick back takes, all this kind of stuff to try and strangle you or rip a limb off on the ground, Brady is much more positionally aware than Burns and is happy to kind of wear you down, control you, and wet blanket you. And I will always favour that style in MMA grappling. You know, if Burns and Brady were in a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu tournament, I'm sure that Burns would completely dominate Brady. But in a cage fight to the death, MMA grappling is very different, and I feel Brady is a better MMA grappler than Burns, and I think he can wear him out with his grappling control. So this is one of those fights where when you look at it on face value, skill for skill, it's not a bad stylistic matchup for Burns, to be fair, but you've got to favour Brady due to his ability to wear Burns down, the fact that Brady should still be improving from fight to fight, whereas Burns is going to be declining. You've got that age statistic, and you at this point, when you look at how often these older fighters lose, you would be a bit of a fool to try and cherry pick, you know, those individual instances where the older fighter defies those statistics and finds a way to win. So my lean would definitely be Brady this weekend. You guys know I don't like to typically bet big favourites in UFC fights if I can help it. As much as Brady is tempting, this is quite a steep price to pay. I would prefer to find opportunities to bet, you know, guys in fights like this at better odds than this. These odds are just too steep. They don't really get me excited, but I do think Brady very, very likely to win this weekend. So if we take a look at the over-under, very likely this fight goes deep. Both guys are tough. Both are well-rounded. They're both pretty good defensively. And like we've already said, neither of them are that aggressive anymore or like to lead the dance. If we look at Burns' record, you can see that over the last few years, he's become a bit of a decisionator, with the majority of his fights going to a decision. And the same goes for Mr. Brady, with plenty of his fights in the UFC going deep. There's a few third-round finishes in there, but, you know, earlier in his UFC career, he was going to a decision pretty frequently, and with how these two match up stylistically, I think it's very likely the fight goes deep. Unfortunately, the odds do reflect that, with the odds being pretty steep on everything up until the over 4.5 rounds, to be honest, which is as good as the fight going to a decision. So again, these odds are too steep for me. They don't get me excited, but if you do want to gamble, make watching this fight more interesting, I would be leaning more towards betting the overs in this one. In terms of the prop bets, I think the most likely outcome is going to be Brady by decision, but the odds are kind of shocking. 2.50 plus 150. That's only going to give you an implied probability of, you know, 40%. Pretty shit odds for a highly specific outcome, in my opinion, especially because we know Burns is both dangerous standing up and on the ground, so you can't rule out a way for him to get a finish against Brady, but also on the flip side, you know, Burns is older, he's declining, so, you know, he could come in this weekend and look a lot worse than usual. He was finished late against Jack Della Maddalena in his last fight. Admittedly, Maddalena's a lot more dangerous than Brady, but you get the point I'm trying to make. Older fighters find ways to lose. We've seen that with Bobby Green, seen that with Mr. Cannonier on the last card. For me, this fight, the odds are probably exactly where they should be. Alright, now let's break down the next fight on this card, which is going to be Natalia Silva versus Jessica Andrade. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Natalia Silva is a pretty big favourite at average odds of about 1.33, which is going to be minus 303 for an implied probability of 75%. Then if we take a look at the odds on Jessica Andrade, she's around an average of 3.45, which is going to be plus 245 for an implied probability of 29%. So Silva is 27 years old, 5'4" with a 65-inch reach, and Andrade is 32 years old, 5'1" with a 62-inch reach. So even though there's nothing major going on in terms of age here, it's only a 5-year age gap, and Andrade isn't really at that stage in her career where you'd expect her to be declining a lot. What I would say is Silva at 27 years old should be making big improvements from fight to fight, and to be fair, she is, you know, improving at a pretty rapid rate in my opinion, whereas Andrade, 32 years old, over 30 pro fights now, in fact approaching 40 pro fights, she is going to have plateaued. And, you know, because she does have so many fights, to be fair, even for her age, you could expect to see Andrade start to decline a bit now. On top of that, we can see that Silva does have a bit of a reach advantage, and she is a bit taller than Andrade as well. I personally don't think this is going to have a massive impact on this fight, not because Silva isn't a technical enough striker to utilize that reach advantage, but simply because Andrade does have an abnormally short wingspan for the division, so she gives up a reach disadvantage to pretty much everyone that she faces in the UFC, and has done throughout pretty much her entire UFC career. She actually started in the bantamweight division, where the reach advantages that she would be giving up would be far bigger than she's given up in the strawweight division. So Andrade is used to dealing with these reach disadvantages. She had to deal with it in her last fight against Marina Rodriguez. This is nothing new to Andrade. She was unlikely to throw her off. So Natalia Silva was one of the first names that jumped out at me as a potential bet this weekend, because I do think this is a great stylistic matchup for her. So I was very disappointed when I began to research this fight, check the odds, and saw that Silva was a pretty big favourite. I was hoping that we would have got playable odds on Silva, and odds far better than this, because in order for me to bet fighters in this odds range, as you guys know, they have to have pretty much no way to lose, because these odds carry an implied probability of 75%. So to find any value, you've got to cap these fighters in the 80% plus range in order to, in my opinion, make a profit long term, which is very difficult to do. It's very difficult to cap fighters in the 80% odds range in a sport as chaotic as UFC or mixed martial arts, especially when we throw things like incompetent referees and terrible judges into the equation. So very, very difficult to find fighters in this odds range which are worth betting, but we have done all right, to be fair, betting fighters in this odds range in recent times. If we take a look at our results, we can see we hit a nice parlay on a recent card where we bet on Chris Gutierrez and Yusuf Zalal. Then Ricky Simone let us down on this one. He underperformed pretty bad and we lost this one. But outside of that, we've done all right on them. We hit a Makachev and the Jailton Almeida parlay, which is very nice. And then we also hit another parlay on Grant Dawson, and fight doesn't go to a decision in the Makachev versus Poirier fight. So on, finding big favourites for these parlays, we're 1, 2, 3, and 1 on our last 4 of them for a profit, which is nice. We got any a bit further back than that. Yeah, we won here. We got even money odds on Lucindu and Barboza, which is very, very nice. So yeah, I'm not totally opposed to betting fighters in this odds range, but when I do, they have to have pretty much no way to lose. So when I started researching this fight between Silva and Andrade, I was optimistic that Silva would fit the profile of someone that would have virtually no way to lose, because from my perspective, this is a very good stylistic matchup for her. But when I started looking at the footage between these two, there was one particular issue with Silva, which I'm going to show you some footage of, which did scare me off betting her as such a big favourite. I do think she's still going to win, but it's very, very difficult to pull the trigger on her in this odds range because in my opinion she's a very, very steep favourite. I actually posted an Instagram reel earlier on today about the danger of betting big favourites. If you go check out my Instagram, I'll leave a link to it in the description below. You can check it out. A team in international football which were 1.06 favourites for an implied probability of 94%. They didn't win. And obviously, to be betting things in this odds range, you need to maintain an incredibly high win rate in order to be profitable long term. And like I say again, on a sport as crazy, as chaotic as MMA, that is not an easy thing to do. So in terms of how these two match up stylistically, it is a very good stylistic matchup for Silva. If it wasn't, she wouldn't be this big of a favourite. Silva's takedown defenses look really good. She's looked difficult to hold down. And not only does Jessica Andrade not shoot many takedowns anyway, but her grappling control isn't that good. So even though Andrade probably does have the advantage on the ground, I don't think she's got the grappling to take Silva down and hold her down, so it doesn't matter anyway. Now in terms of striking, again, Silva definitely has the advantage here. She's the more technical striker out of the two. She's better defensively. She's got better footwork. She's got better movement. She fights long. Silva is great on the feet, and we know that Andrade is very reckless. She's very bad defensively. She also has long periods of inactivity in her fights where she ebbs and flows between these periods or maybe not even period is the right word to say, but she ebbs and flows through moments in rounds where she's applying a lot of pressure on her opponents and then eases off the pressure, stands in the middle of the octagon, and for the most part just gets outstruck and is pretty ineffective. So Andrade is one of these fighters that, will not be able to match the technique, the footwork, and the movement of Silva. But Andrade does bring her own challenges to the table, which can make life very difficult for fighters like Natalia Silva, because we know that Jessica Andrade is a high-pressure fighter. She hits very hard, and she, that recklessness, that pressure that she likes to put on her opponents, it just isn't an easy thing to deal with, especially if you're not that experienced at being put in high pressure situations in a cage fight to the death. So where you've got Jessica Andrade that likes to come forward, take control of the center of the octagon, put her opponent on the back foot and load up on these big winging power shots, that can be difficult to deal with for inexperienced fighters. And I would classify Natalia Silva as inexperienced. Even though she's had a lot of fights, she hasn't really faced a particularly high level of opponent in the UFC, and now she's starting to face girls in the top 5, in the top 10, who are going to present her with challenges that we haven't seen her, encounter in the UFC before. So when we think about the kind of fighters that are going to be very effective against someone like Jessica Andrade, the kind of fighters that are going to be the most effective against her are fighters that are very comfortable fighting on the back foot, that are technical enough to play the role of matador and back up and circle on the outside and kind of pick Andrade off from the outside and counter-strike effectively and kind of use Andrade's overly aggressive style against her. And of course, we've seen fighters like Marina Rodriguez and, most famously, Joanna Jędrzejczyk have a lot of success just kind of counter-striking Jessica Andrade from the outside and punishing her for her, relentless aggression where she's wide open to big counters. Now, she did beat Marina Rodriguez in her last fight, but the reason why I said she struggled against Rodriguez is because Rodriguez was effectively counter-striking her from the outside, and it was ultimately grappling that enabled Andrade to win this fight. So if we're talking in the context of striking, technical counter-strikers that are very good fighting off the back foot tend to cause Andrade problems. So when we're looking at Natalia Silva's style of striking, what we're really focusing on is how effective is she at fighting off the back foot, because that's not an easy thing to do. You can often get strikers who are very technical, very skilled like Natalia Silva that look amazing, but as soon as you put a bit of pressure on them, put them on the back foot, their offense kind of goes out the window because it's a very difficult thing to land strikes while moving backward. One of the reasons why Joanna Jędrzejczyk is one of the greatest female fighters of all time is because she was able to effectively fight off the back foot, land strikes while moving backward. So when we're assessing Silva's chances of winning this fight and the probability that we cap her at winning, we really need to look at how she's likely to deal with the pressure against Jessica Andrade. And so what's really cool about Silva's past fights is that Viviane Araújo pressured her in her last matchup, which gives us a really good look at how Silva is going to deal with the forward pressure of Jessica Andrade. So what I'm going to do now is play a bit of footage of the Araújo versus Silva fight so you can see for your own self, with your own eyes, exactly how Silva is likely to do this weekend. And I don't know why it's firing up. There we go. Okay, so what we need to do first of all is, in fact, we will show you this entire fight because it does show a few things that are potentially a little bit concerning for Silva. So in this first round, what I really dislike about Silva's performance in this first round is that she doesn't show any urgency to work through bad positions. Now again, this probably isn't going to be an issue against Jessica Andrade because Jessica Andrade doesn't really try to beat opponents up in the clinch or work that hard for takedowns with persistent grappling. However, it's just something that I don't like about Silva. So if we just skip through here, we're about a minute in, and about a minute and 10 seconds in, Araújo starts to work for a takedown up against the cage. So in this position, what you want to see is Araújo fight for underhooks very quickly, break the grip of Araújo, and get herself back to the middle of the octagon where she can continue to use her advantage on the feet to outstrike Araújo. So at this point, we're 3 minutes 45 seconds left to go in round 1. And if we just skip through, you can see that Araujo shows very, very little urgency to work through this position. So she's been in this position for about a minute now. At this point, she's been in this position for 2 minutes. At this point, she's been in the position for 3 minutes. So Araujo is winning this round at this point. She's out hustling. She's outworking Silva in this position. And then finally, you can see 20 seconds left to go in the round. Silva does show a bit of urgency to get her back off the cage and just starts to light Araujo up on the feet. Lands some big strikes. Nice spinning back kick there. Starts to land some nice impactful shots to finish the round strong. There's a big head kick there. Nice left hook. And, you know, Silva perhaps stole the round with that late flurry. But I really dislike what I saw from Natalia Silva in that round, because for basically 4 minutes of the first round, she did absolutely nothing. And that is a dangerous game to play, especially when you consider how MMA judges can be. So in that first round, we didn't really get a look at Silva's ability to counter-strike, because most of the round was spent in the clinch with Araujo working for a takedown. But what we see in this round is Araujo actually use some pressure fighting tactics to try and take the fight to Silva and outstrike her on the feet. What I want you to pay attention to is how effective Silva is in different ranges. And this isn't going to be the easiest thing to show you in these video clips unless we make this breakdown video super long and play these fights in their entirety. So what I'm really doing with what I'm showing you here is giving you kind of reference points and homework for you to do yourself. If you want to kind of see what I'm talking about, you can pull these fights up and watch them yourself and see for yourself what I'm describing here. So I'm going to do my best to show you little clips of what I'm talking about, and then if you go watch the Araujo Silva fight in its entirety, it will become a lot clearer to you. So Silva's a very technical striker. She moves very well, and you know, there's no doubt that at distance in the middle of the octagon, she's got the advantage over Araujo and Andrade on the feet. So what you can see in this range is Silva's pretty effective. She moves well. She's good defensively. She lands a decent volume of strikes. She throws a decent volume of strikes. She's quite active in this range. Very comfortable in this range. She likes to be in this range. You can see here she's just kind of chipping away at Araujo. You know, she's pretty comfortable. Nice little head kick there. She's very fast. She's very technical. But this is where the issues start. So when Silva's in the middle of the octagon in kickboxing range, she throws and lands a decent volume of strikes. But as soon as you start to pressure her a little bit and put her on the back foot, she wants to circle away from you, which is not a bad thing, because obviously, you know, she's defending herself from, you know, overly aggressive opponents that are going to try and draw her into big exchanges. This is not a bad thing. But the problem with Silva, what I've noticed in this fight, is when you pressure her just a little bit, her offense completely goes out the window and she stops throwing. So where we're talking about Joanna Jędrzejczyk being an incredible fighter because of her ability to fight on the back foot, and to some extent Marina Rodriguez also being able to do the same thing, at least based on this performance and some of Silva's past performances, she doesn't appear to be very effective fighting on the back foot, which could be a huge issue against a pressure fighter like Jessica Andrade. So if we hit play, what I want you to do is pay attention to how many strikes Silva throws when she's bouncing around on the outside like this. So notice how Araujo is coming forward, and when Araujo comes forward, Silva's offense falls off a cliff. She's trying to throw jabs to back Araujo up, but when you pressure her, she's just nowhere near as effective. Notice how she just isn't throwing very much here. She doesn't like to be pressured on the outside. And where you see her throw this kind of teep kick down the middle here, this is because Araujo's eased off on the pressure, right? So when Araujo's pressuring her and you're seeing Silva bounce around on the outside, that is Silva trying to find space for herself in the octagon so that she can set herself and start to get her strikes back off in a more comfortable range. So that's why you start to see Silva throw those kind of kicks there. But what you notice is when Araujo sustains the pressure and Silva's having to move around to try and create time and space for herself, that offense falls off a cliff. So that's why you see in this sequence she throws that kick, because Araujo's eased off on the pressure. So if we just skip ahead a little bit further, you can see what I'm talking about. So again, with the pressure, Silva's volume, not great. Not great. When she's kind of bouncing around like this, not great. And all this says to me is that Silva is not very effective when fighting on the back foot, which could be a big issue because obviously we know Jessica Andrade is a high pressure fighter that likes to be very aggressive. You can see here, Silva's barely throwing anything. She's barely throwing anything. She'll come forward with a jab every once in a while when Araujo eases off on the pressure. But look at this from Silva. She's just bouncing around from side to side, very low volume, doing a whole lot of nothing. And to be fair, looking quite uncomfortable from the pressure that Araujo is putting on her. And this continues throughout round 2 and into round 3. I don't want to make this breakdown video super long. I'm just going to drag it out if I just keep playing you footage of that happening. But if you go watch Silva in that fight and in her past fights, you'll notice that she just doesn't like pressure very much and doesn't react to it. And this is pretty huge because you could see that Silva was uncomfortable by the pressure that Araujo was putting on her in that fight. And Araujo wasn't even really hurting her or landing anything. Imagine how much Silva may struggle on the back foot if she starts eating some of those big winging hooks that Andrade likes to leap forward and try and catch girls with and circle girls into. So yeah, there are some issues with Silva's striking that does present opportunities for Jessica Andrade in this fight. Now, to be fair, I still think Silva's going to win this matchup because the thing about Andrade is that she doesn't sustain the relentless pressure. So Jessica Andrade tends to be a pretty slow starter. So in Jessica Andrade's fights, you usually don't get a whole lot of pressure from her in round 1. And then she gradually becomes more aggressive as the fight wears on. But she ebbs and flows between sequences of extreme aggression and pressure and then sequences where she kind of stands in the middle of the octagon doing a whole lot of nothing. So when Andrade is coming forward with a lot of forward pressure, a lot of aggression, I think she's going to do pretty well. I think she's likely to catch Silva with some big hooks and, you know, shut down the offense of Silva. But my concern for Andrade in this fight is when she eases off that pressure and she's back in the middle of the octagon in kickboxing range, Silva's just going to be able to light her up. So I do think this is a fight that is likely to be more competitive than the odds suggest, because I do think Andrade can cause Silva big problems with the pressure. But I still think Silva is skilled enough to get the job done and win this fight. So I wouldn't be betting on Jessica Andrade this weekend. I just don't like the odds on Silva because I do feel that there are ways Andrade can make this one difficult for her. And if you're going to bet fighters in this odds range, they have to have pretty much no way to lose. And in my opinion, that's not the case with this one. So unfortunately, Silva isn't going to be the kind of fighter that we look to throw into one of these nice low-hanging fruit parlay bets for us. But, you know, maybe if we keep digging, we will find one or two, because I do really want to bet Cody Duran this weekend. I think he's close to free money against Matchell, which we'll get into shortly. But unfortunately, we're not going to be able to parlay Natalia with Mr. Duran as much as I'd like to. So if we take a look at the over-under on this one, pretty likely the fight goes to a decision in my opinion. Both girls are tough, both are well-rounded. You can see the majority of Silva's fights go deep or to a decision. Same cannot be said for Andrade, that has a lot of fights that end inside the distance for a female fighter. But I think you're going to see Silva trying to circle on the outside and avoid engaging, which will make it very difficult for Andrade to knock her out. And Silva doesn't have the most power in her hands. She did obviously drop Vivian Araujo, but we know Andrade is a tough fucker. So even though she fights with her hands down low, chin up high and exposed, we know she can take a shot. And it won't be easy for Silva to get her out of there. So, you know, good chance this fight goes to a decision. But again, you know, the chances of that happening very much baked into the odds. I don't see any value there. These odds are pretty steep for me. Now, in terms of the props on this one, I think most likely outcome is Silva by decision. But at plus 100 for an implied probability of 50%, those odds are garbage in my opinion. I wouldn't be touching that. Very bad risk to reward ratio in my opinion. But, you know, maybe you'll feel differently. Let me know by leaving a comment below or letting me know on the Discord. So I hope you found that breakdown useful. Alright, now let's break down one of the most interesting fights on this card, which is going to be Steve Garcia versus Carl Nelson. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Garcia is the favourite at average odds of around 1.54, which is going to be minus 185 for an implied probability of 65%. If we take a look at the odds on Nelson, he's around an average of 2.50, which is going to be plus 150 for an implied probability of 40%. So Nelson is 33 years old, 5'11", with a 71-inch reach. Garcia, 32 years old, 6 foot tall, with a 73-inch reach. So both guys about the same age, about the same size. The only real X factor to consider on this one is that Garcia is coming in on short notice. I think about 2-3 weeks notice. Nelson was originally scheduled to face Calvin Kattar. So Garcia stepping up to replace him. So this is a super interesting fight where I do think Nelson is potentially a very good bet. And I am strongly considering betting Carl Nelson this weekend. I haven't made my mind up on it yet, but obviously if you're a member of my community, I'll post it to the betting tips page and our Discord channel if I do decide to pull the trigger on him. But all the things that I'm going to be going through in this breakdown video are going to help you understand why this is a very tricky fight from a betting point of view, but why there is no doubt that Nelson is the better side to be on here. So we're going to show you a good amount of footage in this breakdown video to explain why Nelson's the better side to be on, and also why I think he's a pretty solid bet this weekend. So why the reluctance on my part? You know, why am I saying that Nelson is a pretty solid bet, but why am I very reluctant to go out and bet him? Well, the problem with this fight is that Steve Garcia is one of these guys that has a kill or be killed style. So whenever you're betting against someone like this, you can never feel totally confident in them, because Garcia is one of those guys that from the first second of the fight to the last, he is going to be trying to murder his opponent and send him to the shadow realm. And he's very dangerous. He's got true legit knockout power in his hands. You know, Nelson can be a bit flat. He can be a bit slow. He's not the best defensively. So Nelson's absolutely someone that could get caught flat-footed early in this fight and knocked out. So when we're talking about betting on guys like Carl Nelson, it's impossible for me to sit here and say to you, I'm very confident Carl Nelson's going to win this weekend. He's going to do this. He's going to do this. He's going to do this. And, you know, this is a tough fight for Garcia. And I'm, you know, very confident Nelson is going to come through for us and pay the bills this weekend. In a fight like this, you cannot talk like that. It's impossible. This is one of those fights which is likely to be carnage. It's likely to be chaos. And while Nelson does come with a reasonably good risk to reward ratio, this is also a bet that comes with a lot of risk, because you could easily get knocked out in the first 30 seconds and then your money is absolutely dead in the water. You guys know how I feel about pre-fight betting on the UFC. I've been betting on sports for 15 years now. I've made a profit every single year for the last 15 years. I'll make a profit this year, and at this stage in my career, I'm trying to grow money. I'm trying to put my money in consistently strong positions, and I'm trying to profit from bets while taking on the least amount of risk possible. If I bet a fighter like Carl Nelson this weekend, I know I'm taking on a lot of risk. I know I'm putting my money in a lot of danger, and that doesn't make me feel good, because I know when I live bet football this week, or I live bet on the UFC this week, I'm going to get opportunities to put my money in much stronger positions than Carl Nelson that come with far less danger. And what I really hate doing is finding rock solid, low hanging fruit bets on football and live betting on the UFC, and then giving some of those profits back on riskier bets on guys like Carl Nelson. At this stage in my life, when I've been doing this for 15 years, it's not something I enjoy doing, but at the same time, I look at a fight like this and I'm like, damn, these odds are probably the wrong way round, to be fair to you. If I were capping this fight, I'd have Nelson as the favourite. So why would I have Nelson as the favourite? Why do I say the odds are the wrong way round on this one? Well, the main reason being, both these guys are very dangerous. So Nelson has true legit knockout power, so does Steve Garcia. But the thing about Garcia is that he's much more reckless than Nelson, and he's really the aggressor. So while Nelson's dangerous, Nelson's not the kind of guy that is going to try and drag his opponent into big, wild, reckless exchanges and play rock'em sock'em robots. Garcia is. And the risk for guys like Garcia, when you're coming forward, you're being the aggressor, you're trying to take your opponent out, is that all that forward pressure, all that forward momentum leaves you at risk of walking on to big counters, eating big shots, and being brutally knocked out. And speaking of being brutally knocked out, we know Garcia has got some pretty brutal knockouts under his belt, but we can't forget that he was also brutally knocked out in his fight against Maheshate. So if we bring that up, fight up, I just want to show you how Garcia's recklessness can get him into a lot of trouble this weekend against Ryan Nelson. And like I say, there are a lot of reasons why we can like Nelson in this fight, and this is just one of them. So if you look at Garcia, you can see that he's just very wild, very aggressive, comes forward, swinging for the fences, which of course does make him very, very dangerous. He kind of just comes forward in straight lines, just looking to draw his opponents into big exchanges and throw down, right? Very, very reckless guy. He's wide open here. Like, you look at him in exchanges like this, right? Look at him in exchanges like this. If we slow this footage down, look how vulnerable he is in this position. He kind of just plants his feet, stands his ground, flails his arms around and hopes something lands. But in these positions, he's wide open to big counters. Absolutely wide open to big counters. And you see again here, he just comes forward in a straight line. If we go back, I mean, look at this counter here. He's coming forward in a straight line, hands down low, chin up high, and walks onto a big right-hand counter, which knocks him down. Now, that should have been Garcia's warning. And to some extent it kind of was, because he immediately starts trying to take Maheshate down, but doesn't make a big enough adjustment so that when the fight does go back to striking range, he starts to make exactly the same mistakes again and walks on to pretty much the exact same right hand which dropped him, 30 seconds ago. Look at this knockdown. Boom. He gets brutally knocked out, face down, arse up, stiffened, sent to the shadow realm. Because the guy is literally just coming forward in straight lines. Like, look at this. He's literally just coming forward in straight lines. Chin up high. Hands down low. And look at this knockout. It's absolutely brutal. And what's concerning about this is that we saw Garcia sat down with the exact same punch 30 seconds ago and he didn't learn from it. Wide open. Face down. Arse up. Brutal knockout. So when you look at a guy like Kyle Nelson is obviously, a very big hitter. He's got a lot of power in his hands. We know he's absolutely got the power to punish a guy like Garcia for his recklessness. And we can see it in his last fight against Bill Algeo. If we just skip through here, what I want you to do in these striking exchanges is just pay attention to the range in which Nelson fights at. So here you can see that Algeo is the aggressor. Algeo is taking the fight to Nelson. Algeo is attacking Nelson. But Nelson's just in a defensive shell looking to counter. So you can see that Nelson's not leading the dance here. Algeo's leading the dance. Nelson's in a defensive shell. And when Algeo attacks him, Nelson's just looking to come forward and counter, right? That's the pattern that we're seeing play out here. So if we just skip through a bit in this fight, you can see it again kind of here. Algeo coming forward and Nelson just looking to counter. You see the power he's got there on that right hand though. Big power. But anyway, some crazy exchanges. And look, you can see Nelson's a bit reckless in these positions. You know what I mean? If he's getting into big exchanges with Garcia, throwing big wide hooks like this, there's a legit chance Garcia could catch him first and knock him out, right? Nelson's not a guy I feel at all confident on this weekend. But if we skip through to this sequence here, again, when the fight's back in kickboxing range, you can see that Nelson is from behind the high boxing guard. He's in a defensive shell, and every time Algeo attacks him, he's just looking to back up, circle away, trying not to get drawn into any big exchanges, and he's looking to counter Algeo. So you can see he's just looking to back up, circle away, and look for opportunities to counter. So if we just skip through, how far forward do we want to go? We'll go forward a little bit. We don't want this breakdown video to be super long. You can obviously go watch this fight yourself to see what I'm talking about. But you can see for the most part, Nelson is a lot better defensively than Garcia. Doesn't mean he can't get knocked out, but it does mean he is much more defensively aware of the risks of getting into big exchanges. And you can see he's just looking to counter Algio. Just looking to wait for Algio to blitz forward and then catch him with that big right-hand counter. See there, backs up, slips the shot, and then you see he lands that huge overhand right and then goes for the kill. Is it an early stoppage? You can see the ref wanting to get involved there. Is it an early stoppage? I don't know. Doesn't really matter now at the end of the day. It doesn't change the outcome or the result. But you can just see that Nelson does have big power and he is better defensively than Garcia. So when we consider how these two match up on the feet, we know that both guys are very dangerous. They both pose big risks to one another. But Nelson's a lot better defensively. That doesn't mean Nelson will win a stand-up fight. He's not as aggressive as Garcia. His volume's not as high as Garcia. But it does mean that he can also knock Garcia out on the feet. But there are also other paths to victory for Nelson in this fight and other reasons to like him. And a big aspect of this fight that I don't see a lot of people focusing on or talking about is Nelson's advantages on the ground. So if we look at Steve Garcia's takedown defense and ground game, it isn't very good at all. And we'll go through a few fights here just to kind of illustrate this point. So if we start off by taking a look at his fight against Melquizael Costa, let me just get this fight up. There we go. So we bring this fight up. If we bring this fight up, here we go. So what I want you to do, very, very similar to Natalia Silva in the Silva Andrade breakdown video this week, is just pay attention to Garcia's lack of urgency in positions such as this. So in the first round, you can see that Costa kind of gets to the clinch, puts Garcia in the clinch, starts working for a back take, right? So there's 4 minutes 38 seconds left to go in the first round. What we want to be seeing Garcia do in this position is exactly what we wanted Silva to do, and just start to turn into Costa to defend this position, get some underhooks in play, break Costa's grip, show a little bit of urgency to work out of this position. And you can see there's 4 minutes 30 seconds left to go in the round. Costa doesn't have a lot here, doesn't really have any hooks in. He does obviously have the body lock, but Garcia should be showing urgency to break that body lock. Instead, he doesn't really. He just kind of hesitates in this position, doesn't work too hard to break the grip. At this point, he's been in this position for over a minute. If we keep going, he's been in this position for over 2 minutes. At this point, he's been in the position for over 3 minutes. At this point, he's been in the position for over, well, about 4 minutes. And you can see that Garcia does absolutely nothing in the first round and just allows Costa to out-hustle him in the first round. Now, in the second round, Garcia comes out fucking Super Saiyan, absolutely kills Costa in the second round, to be fair. But even here, you can see a little ankle pick takedown from Costa after he gets dropped, which does indicate, or here you see a little inside trip that does show Garcia's takedown defense isn't the best. Look how easily Garcia goes down there. He does hit a reversal. He does obviously get the finish shortly after with his kill or be killed style. But that footage just kind of shows that Garcia can be controlled. And he doesn't show a lot of urgency to work through bad positions. And this isn't the first time we've seen this. If we take a look at his fight against Shayalan Nerdambike, we see pretty much exactly the same thing. So if we bring that fight up, fight up here, and we skip through to find the first grappling position. So you can see here that Garcia, any second now, gets knocked down. Again, an example of how his striking defense is really bad here, right? Walks right onto a big right hand, the same right hand that Mahashate dropped Garcia with twice. You see here, big right hand, boom, and that's just because he's coming forward with his hands down low, chin up high. So now there's 4 minutes and 10 seconds left to go in the round. Obviously Garcia's hurt. He's going to need a little bit of time to recover here. However, you also want to see him show a bit of urgency to work back up to his feet. And if we just skip through, you can see Norton BK goes into Garcia's guard with about 4 minutes left to go in the round. Then if we just skip through, you can see he works his way back up to his feet about a minute after being taken down. However, he doesn't really work back up to his feet here. He does do a pretty good job of scooting his butt over to the cage where he can start to use the cage to wall walk back up to his feet. However, Norton BK actually postures up and lets him back up here. So Garcia does look very weak off his back, and then here Norton BK kind of postures up, lets Garcia back up to his feet. He then gets back in on the body lock, and this is where you want to, be seeing Garcia show a lot of urgency to work through this position, right? He's been knocked down. He's found himself on his back. His opponent is thrown him a lifeline by allowing him back up to his feet. Here, again, you want to see Garcia turn into Norton BK here, show some urgency to work through this position, but he doesn't. He just hesitates. There's 3 minutes left to go in the round here. At this point, he's hesitated for, almost a minute. And then again, he just gives up a really cheap takedown. Outside trip off some kind of funky throw. So at this point, there's 2 minutes, 20 seconds left to go in the round. Norton BK's in his guard. And again, Norton BK just holds him down very, very easily from top position. Garcia makes very, very little effort to get back up to his feet. And then again, just like earlier in the round, Norton BK postures up and basically lets Garcia back up. This is not Garcia working his way back up to his feet. This is Norton BK allowing Garcia back up to his feet. And then you can see, obviously, Garcia again goes Super Saiyan. But right at the end of the round, does give up another cheap takedown, indicating pretty poor takedown defense. So then if we go into round two, similar to a lot of Garcia's fights, he hulks out, he goes crazy, goes for the kill, and gets the finish pretty early into the second round. Very, very nice. Perhaps he does the same thing to Carl Nelson. Who knows? I don't have a crystal ball. So then what I want to show you is Garcia's UFC debut against Luis Pena. Now, admittedly, this was a long time ago. Garcia has likely improved a lot since then. And also, you don't want to be too harsh on guys in their UFC debut. But this fight, again, does show a lot of the same red flags in Garcia's skill set that we saw from him in those other fights that I've shown of you. Things like him coming forward in straight lines, chin up high, hands down low, wide open to big counters. But in this fight, you can see that his grappling really gets him into trouble. So about 4 minutes left to go in round one, you can see Pena starts working for takedowns and back takes up against the cage. So again, you just want to see a fighter show urgency to work through this position. But if we skip through, Garcia shows absolutely no urgency and spends pretty much the entire first round with Pena wet blanketing him up against the cage. Then if we go into round two, this is the second round, pretty much same story. Garcia comes out the gate super hard. This time though, doesn't get a finish, and Pena just goes to the clinch, starts working for a takedown, and again just gets the back take, starts wet blanketing Garcia with back takes, body triangles, all sorts of stuff on the ground. And again, uses grappling to pretty much dominate Mr. Garcia throughout round two. Then if we go into round three, we can see pretty much same thing happens. Pena just basically gets to Garcia's back and just dominates him on the ground again in round three. So when you look at these fights, this footage that I'm showing you, it's not like Nelson's an amazing grappler. It's not like he's, a really skilled grappler or anything like that. He often doesn't use grappling in his fights. However, when you see a guy like Garcia that is that weak off their back, that takes that long to work through bad positions in the cage, up against the cage, it is possible that a guy like, Nelson can use grappling to steal rounds, pace himself.
He has that ability though.
Rack up control time and cause a guy like Garcia big problems. If we go to the Doo Ho Choi fight, you know, you can see that Nelson did shoot some nice takedowns in this fight, right? You can see a nice double leg entry here. You know, looking for an outside trip. He ends up just picking Doo Ho Choi up and getting the takedown. He's in Doo Ho Choi's guard here. You know, he's tying the legs up Khabib style. You know, Nelson is one of these guys that is a strong, physically imposing guy with decent grappling control. And you can really see that, you know, here in his fight against Doo Ho Choi. He's got decent back takes. You know, he doesn't have tons of success in this fight on the ground. Doo Ho Choi wins some scrambles and things like that, and Nelson doesn't look the best off his back, so perhaps he could get out scrambled by Garcia on the ground, who knows. But the point being, there are multiple paths to victory here for Nelson. You know, he's fighting a reckless guy that we've seen get rocked, wobbled, dropped, knocked out a few times. Nelson's got big power. You know, Garcia looks pretty vulnerable on the ground, to be fair. I'm just skipping through to find situations where, you know, Nelson has a bit more success with his grappling. I don't think it comes until the third round. If we just skip through a little bit here, you can just see this is the third round here, start of the third round. You can see Nelson still got the energy in this third round after a fast-paced fight to commit to the double leg here. Again, decent grappling control. You know, drags Doo Ho Choi to the ground with that little outside trip. Floats from top position to try and get into a dominant position there. Doo Ho Choi is very scrambly on the bottom. You know, Nelson's grappling looks alright, man. Nelson's grappling looks alright, and I think it could be a big part of victory for him against Garcia this weekend. It looks alright. Obviously, do your own research on this one. Again, he loses the scramble. It is what it is, but there are opportunities for Nelson in this fight, and he is the underdog. So I am very, very tempted to bet Nelson. At the end of the day, this isn't a fight where you can feel confident on either side, because when you've got a guy like Steve Garcia that is willing to put himself in so much danger for the win, you can't feel confident on either side. However, the footage clearly shows us that Carl Nelson does have path to victory. More path to victory, in my opinion, than Garcia does, and that's why I think the odds are the wrong way around on this one. Nelson's a very tempting bet. I'm very tempted to bet him. Let me know what you think in our Discord. Let me know what you think in the comments below if you're watching on YouTube. Let me know what you think. Should we bet Nelson this weekend after everything that I've shown you? Are there any risk factors with betting on Nelson that I've missed out on? Let me know what you think. Yes, he's low volume. Yes, he doesn't grapple too hard, but it's an interesting fight, right? So in terms of the over-under on this one, I'd be amazed if this fight went to a decision. I've heard fighter interviews from both these guys this week where both guys have literally said that they'd be surprised if it went to a decision. And so because of that, very, very likely that this fight ends inside the distance, but the odds do reflect that, with the odds on that being pretty steep, although maybe that's something you can throw into a parlay. Who knows? The under 1.5 rounds is kind of interesting, but I wouldn't bet it personally, because if Nelson does come into this fight with a grappling heavy game plan, he could kind of take Garcia down, lay and pray on him, you know, run the clock down and win a really boring decision where he kind of just wet blankets Garcia for 3 rounds. I could see that happening, so for that reason I'm not interested in taking the under 1.5 rounds at big favourite odds. And in terms of prop bets, interesting prop bets for us, Nelson to win by decision is very interesting to me, because like I say, Garcia looks weak off his back. His takedown defense looks pretty bad. If Nelson does come into this fight with a grappling heavy game plan, he could just hit takedowns on Garcia, lay on top of him, kind of wet blanket him, and win a nice drama free boring decision. Not the most likely outcome, but when you look at the odds are pretty juicy, the odds are pretty interesting. And when you look at betting things in this odds range, you don't have to win a super high percentage of them over the long term to make a profit, because obviously the payoff is so big relative to the amount of money that you're putting up. So I do quite like Nelson by decision. That's a decent prop that I might actually take this week. Like I say, it's not the most likely outcome, but in terms of value, I think it gives you a great amount of value, great amount or great risk to reward ratio. So I hope you found that useful. Let me know what you think. Now let's break down the next fight on this card, which is going to be Cody Duran versus Matchell. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Duran is the favourite at average odds of about 1.30, which is going to be minus 333 for an implied probability of 77%. And if we take a look at the odds on Schnell, he's around an average of 3.50, which is going to be plus 250 for an implied probability of 29%. So Duran is 33 years old, 5'7", with a 67-inch reach, and Schnell is 34 years old, 5'8", with a 70-inch reach. So you can see both guys roughly about the same age, roughly about the same size, but they are at very different stages in their careers. So even though Duran and Schnell, sorry guys, my dog is causing me problems. Come here, Geeko. Say hello. Everyone on the internet. She can just bite me and stuff while I'm doing this. Say hello. Okay, she wanted me to pick her up, so we'll just keep her here and we'll finish this one off. This one shouldn't take too long. So, even though Duran and Schnell have a similar number of fights, they're at very different stages in their careers. Schnell is definitely on a steep decline, or he's just not durable. His chin is totally gone. He just can't take a shot anymore. And I think this is because he started his career very, very young. A long time ago, there was a reality TV show called MTV Caged. And it basically was a reality TV show following the regional MMA circuit in Louisiana. And Dustin Poirier was in it, and so was Matt Schnell. You can see him here. And when these guys were like 16, 17, 18 years old, they would fight in these amateur regional shows pretty much every weekend, and they would go to war. So from a very young age, these guys were, involved in absolute wars, taking a lot of damage, taking a lot of shots. And I just think that's led to, someone like Matt Schnell declining way earlier in his career than you'd expect the average 34-year-old to start declining. So it's a bit of a shame for Matt Schnell, but if you look at his recent fights, some of the knockouts that he suffered, you can see that his chin is just totally gone. He's not durable. He can't take a shot anymore. So this weekend, even though he's facing a wrestler in Cody Duran, I still think Duran is capable of hurting him on the feet, just because Schnell's at that stage in his career where it really doesn't matter. I don't know. I love you too, babe. Where it really doesn't matter, who Schnell is fighting. Any able-bodied, semi-athletic person in this division is going to be able to hurt him very, very badly on the feet. So even though Cody Duran is coming into this fight on, just a few days' notice, I still think this is a very bad stylistic matchup for Schnell, because at this stage in Schnell's career, you just cannot trust his chin or his durability. Now, a few years ago, if I knew that Cody Duran was coming into a fight on just a few days' notice, and I had the opportunity to bet against him, on a big underdog like Schnell, I would be all over that, because obviously in Duran's first few fights in the UFC, Duran was one of these guys that would come out the gate very hard, very aggressive early in fights, and fade very hard. His cardio was very, very bad. But since he has trained at American Top Team, Geeko, stop moving the mouse. Since he started training at American Top Team, you can see him with Mike Brown, his cardio has improved exponentially, and now Duran is capable of fighting at a pretty good pace for the entire duration of a matchup. So while cardio is always going to be a concern for a short notice fighter, I'm not overly concerned by Duran's gas tank. I think he's going to have enough energy to be able to hurt Schnell very badly on the feet, and if he can't get him out there on the feet, we'll still be able to use his grappling to get the win here. So when we consider how these two match up when it comes to grappling, obviously Duran does have a base in wrestling. He is predominantly a grappler. And the thing with Schnell is, even though Schnell does have a very dangerous submission game, he's one of these guys that, because he does have such a dangerous submission game, very, very dangerous chokes, he does have a tendency to give up cheap takedowns. And when he's on his back, he's more interested in hunting for long shot submissions as opposed to trying to work his way back up to his feet. So with Duran being a good offensive wrestler with good chain wrestling, decent grappling control, if Duran did start to get a little bit tired in this fight, I think he'd be able to go to his wrestling, hit pretty easy takedowns on Schnell, and just kind of lay on top of Schnell, wet blanket him, grind out a relatively easy win. I don't think Schnell's going to be able to do much to Duran in this fight, if I'm honest, even on just a few days' notice. Obviously, it is a major risk factor that Duran's coming on just a few days' notice, but I still think he gets the job done here. I wouldn't feel great about betting Duran in this odds range, though. Obviously, in order to get any value betting fighters in this odds range, they've got to have pretty much no way to lose. And whenever you've got a guy coming on just a few days' notice, that definitely is never going to be the case, because we don't know what kind of condition Duran is coming into this fight in. But he should get the job done and should be pretty safe for people's parlays. I myself are thinking about parlaying Duran with someone. The only problem is I haven't found anyone to parlay with him yet, which is what we were talking about in the Natalia, Silva, Jessica Andrade breakdown video. So if we take a look at the over-under on this one, we don't actually have the over-under or any prop bets yet, because this fight was only announced a couple days ago. But if you're in my Discord and you want to know, anything about props or something, over-unders when the odds get released for this fight, just let me know. Why are you trying to bite me? Why are you trying to bite me? Why are you trying to bite me? Alright, so that's pretty much it for this fight. I'm going to put Kiko down so we can do the next breakdown without being terrorized by a Shiba Inu puppy. So say goodbye, Kiko. Say goodbye. This way, this way, this way. Yeah, say goodbye. Bye, 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 bye. I'm going to put her down. We'll crack on with the next video. Now let's break down the next fight on this card, which is going to be Trevor versus Yanal Ashm. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that this is one of the only fights on this card in the even money odds range. So at the moment, Peak is the slight favourite at average odds of about 1.80, which is minus 125 for an implied probability of 56%. We take a look at the odds on Ashm. He's around an average of 2.03, which is going to be plus 103 for an implied probability of 49%. So Peak is 29 years old, 5'9" with a 70-inch reach, and Ashm is 29 years old, 5'9" with a 68-inch reach. So both guys the same age and pretty much the same size as well. So this is one of the more interesting fights on the card, and the way I look at a matchup like this is when you take a look at the footage of both guys, there's no doubt in my opinion that from a technical point of view, Ashm is better than Peak everywhere. He's certainly a more technically skilled grappler, and he also moves a lot better on the feet. He's a much more technical striker as well. So when we're considering how this fight takes place standing up and on the ground, there's no doubt that Ashm technically has the edge. But when it comes to guys like Trevor Peak, they're very, very difficult to train for. They're very, very difficult to prepare for because of the violence, the intensity, and the pace that he brings to his matchups. Trevor Peak is one of these guys that thrives in chaos, and his style of fighting is to drag you into a war, and he bets on his chin, his toughness, his cardio, his durability to be better than yours. And so when it comes to a guy like Trevor Peak, he's very difficult to train for because you can't train at the intensity that a guy like Peak fights at. So when you've got a guy like Yanal Ashm who's very inexperienced, he's only had 8 pro fights, it's going to be very difficult for Ashm to prepare himself physically and mentally for the kind of war that Trevor Peak is going to be dragging him into. And you know what they say, or you know what Mike Tyson said, everyone's got a plan until you get punched in the face. And that's really Trevor Peak's style. By creating chaos and carnage and insanity in fights, he can throw guys off their game and drag them into the kind of war, the kind of chaos, the kind of fight where he himself thrives. And so from a betting point of view, this is a really tricky one, because if Ashm is able to, match the intensity, the work rate, the pace that Peak likes to fight at, then he's going to be able to outstrike Peak and outgrapple Peak because he's the more skilled fighter out of the two. But if he kind of breaks under the violence and the pressure and the aggression that Peak is bringing to the table, then obviously he's going to struggle. So my lean on this fight is Ashm, but not with any amount of confidence. I don't feel strongly on this one, just because Ashm is very much unproven. His last fight against Chris Duncan doesn't tell us a whole lot because he injured his arm in the first round, so we can't really judge his performance in rounds 2 and 3. Then the fight against Sam Patterson ended very quickly, and then these fights were a long time ago, and we know that Ashm could have improved a lot since then. So my lean on this fight is Ashm, but not with any amount of confidence. I think this is a bit of a coin flip, and the odds are pretty much spot on in my opinion. So if we take a look at the over-under on this fight, we can see that it's in the even money odds range, which kind of makes sense, right? Because even though both guys are tough, both guys are well-rounded, when you've got a guy like Trevor Peek that is constantly initiating action and trying to drag his opponents into big exchanges, fight-ending sequences, a finish can come at any time. But at the same time, because both guys are tough, because they are both quite durable, and we can see Peek hasn't got any finishes in his last 3 fights. So even though he is an absolute war machine, he hasn't actually managed to finish any of his opponents yet. And on top of that, we can see that Peek's been fighting tough guys like Charlie Campbell and Cheppy Mariscal that aren't going to be easy to get out of there. It's tough to kind of gauge, what Ashm's durability is like, but we certainly know he's very, very tough. And it's tough to gauge what his durability is like just because he hasn't faced any big hitters, guys like Chris Duncan, Dennis Hughes. They're more volume strikers. Well, Dennis Hughes is a grappler, but his striking is volume based. But we do know that Ashm is very, very tough because he obviously broke his arm in the first round of the Chris Duncan fight and was able to continue to fight, continue to perform for another 10 minutes into rounds 2 and 3. So my lean would be Ashm, but not with any amount of confidence. And in terms of my lean on the over-under, I would lean more towards this fight not go into a decision, simply because when you've got a guy like Peek that is constantly trying to draw guys into big exchanges, force him to play rock'em sock'em robots with him, fight-ending sequences, it only takes one shot to end the fight. And because neither of these guys like to take a backward step, they're both pretty aggressive. I think it's more likely that this fight will not go to a decision. In terms of the props, most likely outcome I actually think is probably Ashm's by decision, which is a bit contradictory to me saying that I lean towards the fight not to go to a decision. But yeah, I don't really love the odds on any of the props. Obviously, there is a very, very nice prop, in my opinion, on Carl Nelson to win by decision at odds of 9.0 plus 800. But in terms of props on this fight, there's nothing really jumping out at me. So I hope you found that breakdown useful. Now let's break down the next fight on this card, which is going to be Chris Padilla versus Rongzhu. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Rongzhu is a pretty big favourite at average odds of about 1.40, which is going to be minus 250 for an implied probability of 71%. If we take a look at the odds on Padilla, he's around an average of 3.0, which is going to be plus 200 for an implied probability of 33%. So Padilla is 28 years old, 5'9" with a 74-inch reach, and Rongzhu, 24 years old, 5'9" with a 72.5-inch reach. So both these guys pretty young, especially Rongzhu, with him being in his early 20s. And as a result, both guys should be making pretty big improvements from fight to fight, which we are possibly seeing with Padilla. Because if you look at his recent fights, he moved a lot better, just looked a lot more technical, a lot more athletic than he did in these fights from back in 2021, 2022. In particular, he looked quite bad in his matchup against Darren Smith and has looked a lot better in these fights, which do give us some clues that Padilla is making improvements. But at the same time, Chinese fighters just generally tend to improve at quite a rapid rate. So with Rongzhu being in his early 20s, he's already pretty good. He's already got a strong foundation to work from. We could see him make pretty rapid improvements from fight to fight, like we have seen a lot of other Chinese fighters make. So Rongzhu, obviously a pretty big favourite in this fight. And in terms of how these two match up stylistically, for the most part, it's a classic striker versus grappler matchup. Rongzhu, very much a striker. Padilla is a little bit more well-rounded. But if this fight were to stay standing, Rongzhu would have the advantage. And in my opinion, he'd outstrike Padilla pretty comfortably. So this fight is going to come down to whether or not Padilla can get the fight to the ground and keep the fight on the ground for long enough to score enough points to kind of wet blanket Rongzhu and win a decision. So Rongzhu's takedown defense is pretty good. He's pretty difficult to hold down. He does show a lot of urgency to scramble back up to his feet. But Padilla's offensive wrestling, his ground game, is pretty good. So even though Rongzhu has done a decent job of keeping fights standing, in some of his recent matchups, one thing that is notable to me in Rongzhu's fights is that he does give up pretty cheap takedowns. It's just that he's very good at working his way back up to his feet. But if we see someone like Padilla get his back or get into top position out in the middle of the octagon where he doesn't have the cage as a tool that he can use to wall walk back up to his feet, I'm not sure how good Rongzhu would be in those positions at keeping fights standing. Having said that, the issue we've got with Padilla is that if you look at his last few fights, his grappling did look, pretty physically imposing. He looked reasonably strong on the ground. But then if you go back and watch his fight from 2022 against Darren Smith, he looked quite physically weak. He didn't have any physicality to his grappling at all. So this is one of those matchups which I really think is going to come down to how much Padilla has developed that physical aspect to his MMA grappling since his fights back in 2021 and 2022. If he's now got, good physicality and strength on the ground to match his decent grappling technique, and I think he can cause Rongzhu some problems because he's going to be able to get Rongzhu down, and if he's got that physicality now to his grappling, he should be able to hold Rongzhu down, wet blanket him, and score some points with some grappling control. But the real risk for Padilla in this fight is if he hasn't improved his physicality or grappling control or strength on the ground since those 2021-2022 fights. And if that's the case, I still think he'll be able to get Rongzhu down, but I just don't think he's going to be able to hold Rongzhu down or control Rongzhu for very long, because Rongzhu's pretty good at scrambling back up to his feet. So based on past performances, you have to lean Rongzhu because the majority of Padilla's grappling suggests that he is going to find it difficult to hold Rongzhu down enough in this fight to score any meaningful amount of points on the ground. However, having said that, with him being very young and with there being signs that he has improved since these 2021-2022 fights to some of his recent matchups, I would keep a very open mind to the possibility that Padilla could have improved his grappling to a level where he could actually cause Rongzhu some pretty big problems in this fight. So in my opinion, if you do want to bet this fight, it is dog or pass. There's no way that I would be betting Rongzhu as a big favourite at an implied probability of about 70%. You're just not getting a particularly good risk to reward ratio there. If you do want to bet this fight, I would take Padilla, but he could struggle very bad if he hasn't improved a lot since that 2022 fight against Darren Smith, which you can go and watch online yourself very easily to kind of see the issues with Padilla's ground game for yourself. So in terms of the over-under on this one, I do think this fight is pretty likely to go deep. Neither of these guys look too dangerous in my opinion. Yes, Padilla has got a lot of quick finishes, and if you go on Rongzhu's record, he's got a reasonable amount of finishes as well. However, I do think this is likely to be one of those situations where as both guys start to face a step up in competition, you'll start to see them go to decisions more often because neither guy is actually that dangerous. Neither of them have got like crazy power in their hands or particularly dangerous submission games. So I do think there is a pretty good chance that this one will go deep, and I am eyeing up this over 1.5 rounds bet. I do like that quite a lot. We'll probably hit that. If you're obviously a member of my community, I'll let you know on Discord if I decide to pull the trigger on that. In terms of the prop bets on this one, Rongzhu by decision I think is the most likely outcome, and the odds aren't too bad. Personally, they're not good enough for me to be interested in betting that. If I'm going to bet props, I want much juicier odds than this, but Rongzhu by decision is most likely outcome. So if you're looking to sprinkle a little bit of money on this fight to make watching them more interesting, I don't think it is a terrible bet. So I hope you found that useful. If you did, please hit the like button below. Subscribe if you haven't already. I would really appreciate it if you could help me get this channel grow. Thanks again for watching. Take care, and we'll see you very soon for another breakdown video. Maybe we can get some live streams going for next week's card, get a live research session for O'Malley, Devashvili, something like that. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Nice one, guys. Take care, everyone. Love you all. See you next week. Bye.